One. Hey, everybody, this is the Angel Dog Podcast. This is Brian with my friend again, the weekly series that we have going on, The Big Lie Theory, on John Seaman, outstanding conspirator expert. We've covered a lot of different items in the past here. Last week in particular was the Alpha Bank ruse. We did the Russian hoax. We did GPS. We did fusion GPS. We did CrowdStrike. We did the role of the NSA in the unmasking. We did the role of the media. We talked about Benghazi and the Operation Fast and Furious. That was a pretty bad situation, never to be forgotten. And the summary points of what John was working in the narco trade over in Afghanistan. Okay, so this week we're going to continue on with the big deception and the big lie. And we're going to talk about the deception lying to the FISA court. And I'm just covering a couple things here that John's going to go in depth on. We're going to talk about the President Obama playbook involved in all this to interfere in the 2016 election, him and his crew. We're going to talk about the FISA Title I surveillance warrants and the lying involved there. And then John is at the end, and I should have put this at the beginning probably. He's going to put up for you questions that the country deserves to be answered before next year, people. You got to do your own homework. And I have to say this, I'm going to speak for John, because we've talked about it, myself and John. John has put forward to AUSAs, U.S. attorneys, okay, on the side, whatever, frenzied that we're in the business, and other defense witnesses that John knows, defense counsel, and had them, he vetted basically all the materials you're about to see. Everything has been vetted, not one negative response. Am I right, John?
That's correct.
Everything has been vetted through John, did his homework. I've tried to do some homework on John, for that, on his facts that he gives me, like a stack every week I got to go through. But wow, this is something. So again, before John starts here, I do my technical genius with my finger and bring up the PowerPoint. John's going to go through, we have about 30 some slides, and John's going to go in depth on it, and just outstanding as usual. So I share the screen here with John. Go to the PowerPoint. You go down here so I can see. And John, you should be right there. Am I right?
I'm ready to go, buddy.
Go ahead, man. You're on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're going to cover last week we covered the first criminal overt act, which was the Alpha Bank overt act, where they manufactured cyber tools to give the appearance that Trump was communicating or had communications with the Russians. Tonight, we're going to cover the next two overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy to sabotage the Trump presidency. One is lying to the FISA court, and the other is the fabrication of the Intelligent Community Assessment report. Now, let's talk about how all this comes together. I came across a book called Rules for Radicals, written by David Horowitz, and he had a great summary of how all this thought process, because when you look at this, you got to ask the one question: how does all this come together? How did this nefarious conspiracy, what's the themes? What are they thinking? And what are we watching today, and how did we get here? Well, in the Obama playbook, in this book, Rules for Revolution, it basically lays out the 6 things you're seeing today, every day, why the power of the state is being used to destroy American citizens. One is, in the first rule, is politics is all about the power relationship, and the key point in there, to advance one power. So that should tell you right then and there. That's where Obama's thought process is. They break it out. There's only 3 kind of people in the world: the rich, the powerful, the poor, disenfranchised, and then what they call you, the apathetic middle class, or in derogatory terms, the sheep. Then he talks about the changes brought through what? Relentless agitation, troublemaking. So you see the stuff like Black Lives Matter and Antifa and that kind of thing. Gives you an idea of how they formulate these groups to move their radical agenda. Then no conversation between an organizer and his opponent. And this was the key one we discussed a couple of weeks ago, is they had to make Trump the object of their hate. And how did they do it? As we explained, just like we gave the analogy of just how Hitler and the Nazis made the Jewish people the victims of the hate for the German people to do what? In both these instances, to advance a radical ideology, because people are emotional creatures. And if you get people to hate the object, then you can see what comes out, the evil that results from it. Then the organizers never focus on a single issue. That brings up never let a crisis go to waste. If you notice, every time something comes out about Biden or the investigation, there's a new thing that comes out the next day, either an indictment on Trump or some new distraction, climate change, the hurricane that never happened in California. So you get those kind of created crisis. And then the last one is taunt your opponents, demean them. Use it. That's one of their favorite tactics. If you've ever been on Twitter or any of the social media sites and you get these trolls, first thing they do is they'll call you, oh, you're a racist or you're a conspiracy theorist. So they want to demean you, and that's one of the major rules.
Trolls
and that's basically,
bots. You know, John,
yeah,
a lot of that is trolls and bots. Some of it, they're
exactly
not even
right.
They're not even real people. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So in putting this whole thing together for the public, I want to give you some of the great articles so you can do your own homework, so you can understand and read for yourselves on some of the great articles written by some of these writers. The best one that explains the weaponization of the National Security Division was done by Greenwald. He wrote 3 articles on the conservative treehouse deal. It's on there on the screen. If you query those 3 articles, you'll get the breakdown on how Obama and Holder reorganized the National Security Division and how it became weaponized and how they used the tool, how they were going to use those tools to implement the agenda you see today. That's why you got the FBI out there talking to big tech and private industry to do what? Suppress and censor the public's free speech, as an example. Next slide. The next one is on these articles here, reporting on exposing the crime of the century, the conspiracy itself. There's some great articles, one on the soft coup that breaks down on some of these bloggers have done some great investigative work connecting the dots. So all these articles here will give you a great example of connecting the dots. So if you were to read all these articles that are up on the deal, one of my favorite is the 35 key people in the Russian hoax that need to be investigated. And that'll give you a real good idea of who some of the players are. And then you'll see the commonality that I always talk about in this, where you have former Obama officials are now working in the Biden administration, which a lot of those that are listed on that 35 are. And then you get on Brennan on the Steele, the intelligent community assessment. So you're going to get some great information on the how they did it. So this is just a couple of the out of hundreds of research articles. These are some of the better ones for you, so you can get an understanding of how this conspiracy came together. Next slide. Now these 2 that I picked are probably the 2 best articles that explain and exposes the media complicity in the crime of the century. One was written by Molly Hemingway, the other one by Margaret Cleveland. They both worked for the Federalist. The one on the 61 hacks, I believe, was written by Hemingway, and the media silence Steele as a superhero was written by Cleveland. Outstanding articles. If you were to read these 2 articles, you'll get a great idea how they were able to use the media, and it kind of timelines on the reporting, and then you'll understand how they use the media as their lapdogs to push the Russian hoax theory.
John, what were the years on these? What was the timeline years on these?
These were, I believe, written anywhere from 18 to 20. 2020, yeah. Great articles. And then let's talk about now, we're going to discuss the 2 major criminal overt acts. But let's talk about the continuation of the conspiratorial agreement to interfere in the in the 2016 election to do what? To destroy Trump. There's a real key. You got to, when you look at who the organizers were, what they were doing, and what was their goals, you got to go back and look at, and the main driver of this is President Obama. So you got to go back, as that book was written, Rules for Radicals, to understand where his thought process as a community organizer and how they brought all this together. He gave a speech in July 2nd, 2008 in Colorado Springs. And I thought this was really telling, and I'll read it for you. It says, "We cannot continue to rely on our military in order to achieve national security objectives. We got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, and well-funded." And this, basically, that quote summarizes it all for me, because it shows how the weaponization of the intel apparatus and the FBI were used and how it all comes together on that. And then you get the illegal unmasking of American citizens as one of the illustrations. And then you have the continued agreement. What's the part? It establishes a pattern of former Obama people and current Obama officials in the Biden administration working with others being who? The media, big tech, private industry, banks, for what? The common purpose to deceive the American public by promoting what? The big lie theory that Trump colluded with the Russians to obstruct and sabotage the executive branch of government.
John, I have a question. And
yes,
I'm going to ask you your personal opinion. Audience, listen what I said, personal opinion, okay? This number one point there, are you, in that speech on July the 2nd, 2008 in Colorado Springs, the other agency that he's referring to, are we now assuming, are we guessing, what? That it is the FBI, or are you talking DHS and other agencies involved?
No, I'm talking the National Security Division, because that's where all this comes. As you can see, he's talking about how to achieve a national security objective. And what Obama and Holder did back in the early 2011, 12, 13 period and 14 is they reorganized the National Security Division, which is the center point for all national security decisions. So that gives them total control over. That's why you see everything classified and everything else. Plus, the National Security Division is the only place in the government where there's no congressional oversight, nor is there any IG oversight. So they're basically doing what they want, and that's why you get the attitude you get today, basically from these agency heads or the bureaucrats in charge, these unelected bureaucrats. We're in charge, and you, the public, can't do anything about it.
We're talking from the inside out, and the rest of the federal agencies at this point will just become an enforcement arm for whatever area.
That's correct. That's why, think about this, ladies and gentlemen, a great point to illustrate it. Why would you be arming and ordering a ton of armament for the Internal Revenue Service? In my day, the IRS was hardly ever on any kind of enforcement operations, nor did I ever see them ever go on an enforcement operation, to be quite frank. They were normally the ones doing the paper or the accounting or following the money, but you'd hardly ever see them out on any kind of criminal raids or involved in guns. But today, what are they doing? They're arming all these agencies to create what? A federal kind of overall federal police. Stasi, if you want to call it.
Back then like they are now, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wow, something, John. Go ahead.
So let's get into this of how they did this. So you had in July, we know about the agreement that the Russians intercepted Hillary's plan. That was given, the Brits did, they gave it to Brennan. Brennan briefed Obama. And what Brennan did is Brennan then went and briefed the Gang of Eight, and he briefed some senators like McCain and whatever, pushing the information of what they had, that there was collusion between Trump and the Russians, okay? And what's interesting about this is that at the same time, the FBI didn't tell Congress about what they were doing or what their investigation was. They didn't notify the congressional oversight that they had just opened up 4 investigations on Team Trump on there. And then you have the Inspector General report in 2016, where they discovered that the Obama administration was abusing the FISA process by targeting and spying on President Trump and other Americans. In fact, I believe it was like the percentage was 85% of abuses in the FISA system. You had the FBI with a contracting group that is yet to be identified today that was there collecting NSA information on Americans, taking that information. This day, we have yet to been told any of the truth of who this contracting agency is working for the FBI, where they're at, and what did they do with the information. And then you had Christopher Wray testify that he agreed that with the DOJ report that the justice system and the FBI illegally surveilled Carter Page. Why that's important? Because that sets the stage that none of the FISA warrants that were obtained were legally predicated. And that's what Durham found in his report when he wrote one of his findings, that none of those investigations were legally predicated, meaning they should have never been, they never had the legality to open those investigations. Next slide. Modus operandi, the spying on Trump. After the FBI submits and gets approval in October on the warrant, you've got Mike Rogers at the same time goes to the FISA court and notifies the presiding judge that signed the first FISA warrant and explained the abuses that he had discovered through the DOJ investigation. Okay, Judge Collier ended up writing an opinion lambasting the FBI for violating people's Fourth Amendment rights on there. And this caused the head of the National Security Division, John Carlin, and I want you to remember that name, to resign from his position before Rogers went to the judge, and also before the judge signed that warrant, he resigned. And what's interesting about him is that when Biden got elected president, guess who they brought back in to the National Security Division to take his old job back? John Carlin.
Now that right there, John, you talk about, and again, people in the audience, and even us, even if we were in the system or on the job at that point, I would venture to say the majority of agents didn't even know that name. Didn't even
That's
know.
true.
They didn't even know that name. So how can we expect John and Susie Q public paying their taxes, working 2 jobs, putting kids through school, whatever, to know this? I mean, and the media is not going to put it out. It's going to be lowball.
No, they're not. They're going to hide this, because that's one of the things on these podcasts. What we're trying to get through is that the commonalities of why this is a criminal and it's a conspiracy, because you have the commonality of the same players that were involved in the Obama administration now involved in the Biden administration. So
John,
the same players.
Another opinion question for you, for the audience.
Yeah.
Do you believe in this? And this is a conspiracy, correct? So
That's correct.
So I'm asking for the audience and for myself. Do you believe that they just kept poking and there's no reaction, there's no resistance from the public? There's no resistance because they're controlling the media. And then now we all know they just do it openly. They don't even
Well, Brian, the reason they do it openly is because you have to look at what Durham's findings were, okay, in his final report. Basically, they only charged one person, and he wasn't charged with any heavy crime. He was only charged with a 1001 violation. But here's that guy, and we're going to discuss that in one of the slides down the road here of what he actually did, okay? And they're in control. They control the whole thing. And that's why you see today the 2-tier system of how they misuse their color of authority. And that's why it's so important for the public to understand is that you're living right now under the illusion, the average American, and this is what they count on. Remember, they count on you being sheep and you're not paying attention that a majority of the voting public, so they're counting on that naivety and that you're not going to take the time to understand that you're being played. And that's one of the purposes we're doing on this podcast is to educate the public of how all this came together and what the threat is to you and your freedom. So in the next 14 months, you're going to have a major election, and that way you have all the information. You can do your homework, you can read the Substack, you can go and look at the sources, and then you, the public, get to make that determination on which pathway this country or nation goes down, freedom or tyranny. And then we can live with whatever road we're going at, because that's America by the vote. And that's how it works. So let's talk about this.
John. One more. I want to hold you up. One more thing about Mr. Carlin there. Maybe a little known fact. He's a high tech guy. He was involved in cybersecurity and Chinese hacks and all that. So keep in mind in the back of everybody's head about big tech. Okay, about big tech in the government. And now he's under. Am I right? He's under the Biden. He's in the Biden administration.
Yeah, and I think he just resigned, or he's planning on.
From the current position now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think another attorney's going to take his spot. So let's talk about the FISA Title I, so you understand what the tools of how dangerous this tool is to your American freedom. So the FBI applies for. Well, let me back up here. In the summer, 2-3 months prior, the FBI tried to get a FISA warrant on an emergency basis from the FISA court. They submitted it, so and had some of the details of the Steele dossier in there, and the judge rejected it. Okay, so they weren't able to get a FISA warrant. So now they reapply in October. They take the information out of the Steele dossier that's been circulated by Brennan and others to the Senate and all these different media outlets. So you've got all this circular media and information coming in, as we discussed in the last 2 or 3 podcasts ago, of how they use the Brookings Institute to go to State Department and other various government entities, circulating the same information out of the dossier to give the appearance that it's coming from different sources, thus giving to the public through the media that, all that information must be solid because it's from different entities, and it gives the appearance that it's good information, when in fact it only came from one source, period, and it was all unverified. So let's talk about this. So in October 21st, they apply for the FISA warrant. They go to Judge Rosemary Collier. Sally Yates and James Comey are the applicant's signatures on the warrant. So they sign off, swearing that everything in that warrant, to the best of their knowledge, is true and whatever, and that's important. Then let's discuss this part for the public so you understand what a Title I FISA warrant does, what it authorizes. It gives any and all surveillance methods, establishes legal authority to review all files and records associated with the target. In this case, it was Carter Page. And more importantly, and anyone he comes in contact with, and anyone they come in contact with. So if Carter Page is talking to President Trump or President-elect Trump or candidate Trump, they get to listen and see and do his contacts. So it's kind of like it's a very broad, open tool. It's one of the biggest tools they use, and it was supposed to be set up to go against overseas terrorists and trace back on who they had contacts in the States. Instead, they've reversed these tools, and they're using against you, the citizen, to spy on you, to use these tools to criminalize political opposition or people they disagree with. So in essence, it permits all electronic and physical surveillance, wiretaps, phones, electronic records, database extraction, and the warrant is retroactive. So it goes back to wherever they started their case at, which would have been in August. So they were able to start really going back that far. So think about this. Then in January, they do a week before the inauguration of Trump, Sally Yates and Comey approved the second warrant, FISA warrant, extending that warrant. And who are the targets of the warrant? Okay, on it. So you're getting into now the Team Trump. Remember, if it's Team Trump and they're in contact with President-elect Trump, they get to listen in on what he's doing and what the other people are doing. Then you have in June, Dag Rosenstein, who was the acting Attorney General, and Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, everybody knows his name, they signed the third and final FISA warrant, reauthorizing, and when Trump takes office. And at this point, ladies and gentlemen, this is probably one of the most important points. In January 5th of 2016, okay, President Obama held that famous meeting with Comey, Yates, Vice President Biden, and they discussed the Comey matter, okay? And this was the famous one where, and Susan Rice wrote the day of Trump got sworn in, she wrote the midnight email, basically giving the appearance that what they discussed in that meeting was above board and above the law, when it really wasn't, because what they were discussing was, as we now know, how to frame General Flynn. And that's what we're going to discuss in next week's podcast, the framing of Flynn. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. But the important part, as you can see, I want the audience to know is how invasive these tools are, because they're meant to protect the American public from terrorism and criminality. And what do we have? It's being used as a tool against citizens.
It's just incredible. It is.
That's correct. So basically, when Trump said, and everybody laughed at, remember all the newspapers, and he came out and he said, "You spied on me." Well, Trump, they never told Trump when he took office. He was unaware that any of this was taking place, but yet the Congressional Oversight, GS, side. So you had all these other people that knew that Trump was being spied upon, but President Trump didn't. And this, remember, he hadn't been sworn in yet. So this happens under what? Happens under President Obama's watch. So you have an outgoing president spying on an incoming president. So that, I just want to frame the matter for you. So when they talk about right now, this President Trump having 90 some indictments on him, I want people to remember this, okay, what's happening here. So let's get into what did President Obama know? Well, let's look at the best thing is look at the communications between the two head FBI agents that had the most animus at the time. And what were they saying? You have the August email where you have Strzok Texas page, and he says the White House is running that. Why is that important? Because in my lifetime, I've never seen where the White House would be running an investigation on a presidential candidate when they have information that this was a plan by Hillary and the DNC to taint Trump with Russian collusion to cover up her emails. So that's very important. Then you look at the August 15, 2016 email from Strzok to Page, and this is where they talk about the life insurance policy. And they start talking about in consideration in Andy's office. Okay, so obviously that should tell you, the public, that it's just not Strzok and Page having these conversations. You've got the deputy director involved. So, you know, 3 people right now, 4 actually, the White House, Strzok, Page, and Andrew McCabe are part of something. Okay. Then you have on September 2nd, 2016, from Strzok, and then one from Page saying, Pontus wants to know everything. Now think about that. The President of the United States wants to know everything that the FBI case agents are doing on Crossfire Hurricane. And the question you got to ask is, why? What for? What purpose? Then you go to November 9th of 2016. You've got Strzok and Page, exchange text. And this is a key one for me because when we talk about, conspiracy, always there, the left saying, oh, this is all made up tirage and bullcrap. Well, this is, to me, communications mean a lot. They put out a text, and this tells me that they were involved. They knew what they were doing. They referred to a secret society the day after Trump's victory. And that may be the first meeting of the secret society, okay, they talk about should be held. And they talk about Bill Precept just invited us for a 2-hour meeting to talk strategy. I'm a criminal investigator, ladies and gentlemen. If I had this text and I'm doing to find out, and I want to see if there's an agreement here, what did they know? When did they know it? What did they say? What was the purpose of this? This would have been one of the first starting points if I was going to interview any of these agents from an internal affairs deal to drill down to find out, was it a conspiracy? What were they talking about? Secret society. What was so secret and who was involved? Okay? Because you have to look at the actions of what these people did.
But what a choice.
They lied. The FBI, the premier law enforcement agency that everybody wants to tell you about, what did they do? They spied on a president-elect after he got elected, and they continue spying on him when he was still the president of the United States. That should tell you everything that you know what's going on.
What a choice of words, a secret society. That's crazy.
Very true.
At that level.
At that level, you have to think about this, how nefarious this plan is. And this is where from my perspective, when you put these kind of investigations together, this is why you have to identify all the different players and look at what their roles were. And that's where you start drilling down. By themselves, those texts, if you notice, if I remember correctly, the DOJ in their investigation in 2019, what was one of their findings? They said that there was no animus or no kind of corroboration of anybody getting together. Well, if they had been, I don't know what kind of work they do or what kind of questions were asked, but I can tell you this, it certainly wouldn't be the type of questions that should have been asked, because the first question should have been pulling their communications, drilling down, calling in, finding out, what did you mean by this?
Well, John,
what was the purpose?
From an investigative point of view, we both know they're scripted. I mean, and back in the day, the way our agency ran, if you knew what you were doing, there's nobody standing over your shoulders. You're rolling. You know what the confines of the law are and what the elements of the criminal act are, and you take it.
Very true.
But they're not digging. They're not. It's scripted. They just did it. Check box.
Well, Brian, that's why we have the problem we have today. You've got where you have all these unelected FBI agents, analysts, and whatever that have been hired on that for some reason think they're patriots on resisting an incoming president because they don't like his policies or him. Well, as I explained in one of the conspiracy podcasts, they don't get that right. That's not their job. When you get sworn in on a law enforcement or an investigative deal or anything on a sensitive matter, and you work for a federal agency, you don't have the right to take or attack the executive branch or whatever policy. Your job is to carry out the law. And in this case, they took their tools and they reversed it and went after the target of what they wanted to stop.
But John, I don't have hard fact evidence on this. I haven't talked to a rookie, excuse my language. Okay. It means like doesn't have a year on the job, FBI or any other agent as of recent, but just what you just said, somewhere along the line in training or the policy of an agency to have an agent go out with that mindset, that's coming from an inborn in the agency. That's an admin deal, man.
Well, that's a culture problem, and that's what I've been trying to. I mean, a lot of these pundits on the media want to say, well, 99% of the FBI are good people. No, 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 no. I disagree
I
with
don't
this.
buy that either.
Okay, I don't buy this. Not when it's directed from the top down and they're threatening. I'm sure a lot of those agents are great people, but here's what the public needs to know. They have an obligation if they saw criminality or something wasn't on the on and up, they have an obligation to report it. And by not reporting it, and that's, as I said in one of the prior podcasts, Durham, what he found incredible when he interviewed all these agents was the lack of any of these agents coming forward on what they were doing because they were not following any known procedures or investigative policies. Okay. And the other factor is I think there was a FBI female that was on, I saw last week, and she summarized it very, very well, along with Chris Steiger, I think his name is. He was a deputy director. And both of them said the same thing. Steiger said the culture within the FBI is now corrupted. And what she said, which I thought was important, is they've hired a lot of these new analysts, and the agency has now become more of a collection information agency. And you have a lot of these intel analysts that think they can put their own spin on what their own political spin on what they're analyzing, and then put it on paper with no repercussions. And that's why we're at the problem we're at today.
Public,
That's why.
ladies and gents, you realize how dangerous that is? How dangerous and powerful that is. That is dangerous. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
So let's go to the key point. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's think about this. We've covered a lot of information in the first 5 podcasts. We've seen how you've got a plan. You've seen how information was manipulated for Alpha Bank. You see where they opened up cases on Team Trump when they had no legal predication. Now you get this situation where you have Kevin Kleinsmith, who was an attorney, okay, on November 6th, the day after Trump gets elected, he puts a text out to other FBI employees. I'm so stressed on what I could have done differently. He summarized it very well. I can't imagine the systematic disassembly of our progress over the last 8 years. The crazies finally won. This is the Tea Party on steroids. And then he gives some derogatory stuff on Pence is stupid. And then 2 weeks later, he sends a text. An FBI agent asks him, have you changed your opinion on working on this thing? And he responds, hell no, added, viva la resistance. Well, you're a lawyer. You say viva la resistance. That tells me that you didn't do this by yourself. Kleinsmith didn't make the decision to hide the information that Page was a CIA asset and leave that out of the warrant, okay, which is what got him John Duff. However, they didn't charge Kleinsmith with any major felony. They charged him with 18 USC 101A, which is lying to the FBI, okay, which is a slap on the hand thing. And just to show you the double standard, he was put on probation by the judge. The judge wasn't outraged in D.C. of what he had done. The FISA court judge wasn't outraged for what he had done. The Washington bar reinstated his bar license so he can practice law, okay? Now you got a guy convicted of a felony and he's got his bar license reinstated, and yet none of the judges are upset. Now you got to ask yourself, look at the double standard of all the people that were arrested going to the Capitol, and a lot of them just happened to show up there and were thinking they were protesting under their rights to assemble. And look what the judges said about all these people. They're terrorists. They're this. They should be locked up forever. Just to show you the double standard of how corrupted our justice system is, including the judges in that D.C. whole, from the district court to the circuit court on some of their decisions. Now let's talk about the next Overt Act. which is the fabrication of the intelligent community assessment. I call it the deception document. Okay. Next slide. Let's look at the timeline of this report. This is important. In November, right after the election, Obama came on TV and told the nation that the Russians did not change any votes. The system was secure. And that's basically what and nobody tampered with it. And that's the speech he gave, I think, a day after the election. Then in November, on December 6th, what does President Obama do? Now remember, he's leaving in over a month. He orders the three heads of the agency, the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA, to put together a intel community assessment report. And the effort was headed by who? CIA Director Brennan and FBI Espionage Chief Peter Strzok. Okay, then on January 17, and this is really important, before he leaves the presidency, he signs an executive order ordering the distribution, directing the NSA to all the information on the December 2016 review be distributed to 16 other U.S. intel agencies. Why is that important? Because a lot of that information that was published in that report was leaked to the press to promote the idea that Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign to do what? He favored Trump to get him elected, to hurt Hillary Clinton. That was the whole gist of the ICA, to put in that whole thing that the Russians favored Trump over Hillary. Okay. However, that wasn't true. Okay. Because in March 2018, you had a letter from Rogers, and he informed the committee, and this is important, that a 2-page summary was added to the appendix section of the ICA, which was what? It was the approval process, and in part of the approval process, they took in consideration to reach the conclusion that Putin favored Trump over Hillary was the Steele dossier. Next slide. This is important because guess who the two biggest promoters of the dossier were? FBI Director Comey and Assistant Director McCabe. They pushed to get the Steele dossier into the assessment report. Okay. Brennan disagreed. He left it out of the gist of the report. However, he put it into Annex A of the report. He testified, Brennan testified under oath that none of that information, that they gave any consideration to the Steele dossier in the appendix section. McCabe made the statement that the reason the FBI wanted the dossier included in the body of the report was because President Obama wanted all FBI information included in the ICA. And you got to ask a question, why? Okay, why? Because it promotes what? It's the disinformation to promote the big lie theory of what? To convince the nation that Trump colluded with the Russians and was an illegitimate president. The media took that, ran with it, and that's how how you all got misdirected and deceived by the Obama administration. If you look at the comments made by there was comments made by two senior U.S. intelligence officials that retired from the NSA, Mike Rogers and Fred Fleiss, who worked as a CIA analyst for 19 years. They disagreed with the ICA findings. Next slide. The Obama administration promoted the big lie. Okay, that was the big part. However, when you look, the problem with promoting all this, and they put out to the press, the Senate, and all the reports said this was unimpeachable and not up for debate. That's what they put out to get you, the public, to believe that Trump colluded or members of his team colluded with the Russians and was an illegitimate president. In fact, Hillary Clinton still believes that to this day. However, here's the problem with the whole report. The ICA did not reflect the consensus of the intel community, okay? They didn't put this out on their normal practices when they do these ICAs. If you were going to kick it out, you would go to other agencies and get their input, okay? Whether they agreed or disagreed. Instead, it was only 3 people that had input: the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA. And Rogers didn't agree, or lukewarm agreed, of what the ICA final findings were, okay? And he's the one that told President Trump that about the FISA abuses after Trump took office. So all these agencies that had relevant expertise on Russia were never included in the report, which would have normally been done on any other kind of intelligent assessment report, according to Fred Fleiss, okay? Nuez documented in 2018 that the dossier was added as an appendix and that it was part of the overall ICA review approval process. And this is what Rogers testified to, that the Steele dossier did factor in to the conclusion, their conclusion that Putin favored Trump over Clinton. That's why Rogers was very skeptical of this, and he's I think one of the heroes in this matter. He was the one that found the FISA abuse by the FBI. So I look at Rogers as one of the stand-up guys in this whole thing. He testified that while the Russians sure wanted to hurt Trump, he wasn't confident that the FBI and CIA and their actions was designed to help Trump. He explained that such an assessment didn't have the same levels of multiple sourcing that they normally do. Next slide. Fleiss, okay, he's got 19 years, was an analyst for the CIA, pointed out the CIA is missing dissenting views or evaluations or collusions from outside reviewers, which would have been the norm. In this matter, it didn't. Controversial intelligence community assessments like this, they include outside review groups like Homeland Security and other groups. There were none. Fleiss asserted Brennan swore the dossier was not used in any way for the basis for the ICA, yet he heard snippets of the dossier from the press in the summer of 2016, said some of that information matched up, which was in the ICA. So it's kind of hard to believe that what Brennan claimed is impossible to believe. Next slide.
And again, John, all those agencies that were left out, they had to have people at the top in those various agencies to play along with the game. They had to.
That's correct. That's very
it didn't
correct.
filter down, but they had to. There's no way.
Yeah. Brennan was pushing the Trump collusion line in mid-2016 and claimed collusion in August 2016. He said it would have been impossible for Brennan to do that if he wasn't aware of what was in the dossier. And we now know that Brennan was aware because of the Russian intercept and the Brits telling him from that standpoint. He also pointed out that the key points matched the central, some parts of the dossier. And the House Intelligence Committee colluded that Brennan, who worked at the White House in the White House as Obama's national security, or concluded with Brennan, created a fusion cell. Okay, Brennan testified when he was interviewed by Durham that he created the first fusion cell on Russian election interference after he briefed President Obama in late July 2016, made up of analysts from the CIA, FBI, and NSA. And they produced a series of papers during the campaign. The problem with that is, okay, that wasn't the time frame that Brennan had created this. Brennan created back in April, and this has been verified by a CIA member who reported, and it was reported in the media, that Brennan put together the first fusion cells way back in early April of 2016 two fusion cells, one headed at the FBI and one headed at the CIA. So you got to ask the question, was Brennan being truthful? Was he lying then, or is he lying now? And none of this conflicting testimony was ever confronted or resolved. And according to Fleiss, he believes the information in the ICA was intentionally manipulated. And I tend to agree with him based on the information. Then you get into the transcript of Clapper with Jim Ceruto in October of 7th of 2019, and they talk about the Russians were their main concern. What he's telling CNN is the main concern of the Obama administration during this time was the threats posed by the Russians to the political fabric of our election system. Okay, on what they done, the interference, and President Obama wanted to make sure why he ordered the ICA so they didn't ignore Russian meddling and the threat it posed. Okay, and that's what he instructed all his chiefs to assemble what they could and make it available in that report and then pass it on to the Congress. Here's the problem with this, ladies and gentlemen. In March of 2016, President Obama got rid of and dismantled the CIA unit that was responsible to counter this Russian interference in our electoral process that had been operating for almost 40 years. So you got to ask the question, why? And then you had, as I told you in the other podcast, President Obama, if the Russians were such a threat, and he ordered, and the reason why the ICA was ordered was to counter that Russian threat, then I wish somebody would please ask Obama under oath, why then, when the intel community came to him in August of 2016, why, and said, hey, the Russians' cyber activity has picked up, we need to do something to counter the threat, he told them to stand down. So that's for you, ladies and gentlemen, to make the determination on, you can't have it both ways here. You can't sit there as a president, say the Russians are the biggest threat, and then slyly, unbeknownst to the public, because this was very rarely reported, okay, of dismantling the unit that had been in charge for 40 years to counter the Russian threat, and then not even countering the cyber threats as they picked up in August. So I hope you can now see what the issue is here. Then you have the fact that the Obama administration, Mueller Senate Intel Committee, and the intelligence community, FBI, CIA, they never considered nor assessed Hillary Clinton's, Charles Dolan, who was a registered agent for the Russian Federation, John Podesta and his brother, and the DNC ties to Russia and the Ukraine. Why? These are questions you need to look at and start asking. Then we get into conflicting information. As I said, was I lying then or am I lying now? This is one of the things as a criminal investigator, especially when I was in internal affairs, when we'd catch people saying one thing, we'd confront them with the lie and then get them to say the next thing. And then we'd ask them, well, which one's the truth? Then or now on it. So you had Clapper he conceded in a CNN interview that the assessment was based on substantial content of the dossier. All right. And then he maintained that they were able to corroborate certain allegations. Well, I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, nobody corroborated anything in the Steele dossier. It was totally fabricated. All the reporting that was put in by the media that unnamed intel sources had corroborated the information was a big lie to you, the public, to get you to believe that the intelligence community, to believe the big lie that Trump had colluded with the Russians. That's how they do it. That's how they did it. So these accounts definitely they conflict with Brennan's May 2017 testimony before the House Intel Committee, where he said, they asked him, was the Steele dossier used in any way basis for the ICA? that Russia interfered in the election to elect Trump. And Brennan repeated this claim numerous times, including in February, Meet the Press. No, it was not. So you tell me what's the truth. That's why you need to have, when I say you need to have a full investigation from the origins of this to current, to drill down, to show the scope and extent. This is why the Russian collusion hoax needs to be thoroughly investigated. So you, the public, learn the truth, how corrupted the government is, and it's the only way we can restore the rule of law and the public trust in the rule of law in the country by doing a full investigation on this. And I hope the next president who gets elected will look at that, and I hope has the courage to appoint an attorney general and actually do a criminal investigation beginning from the origins where the British told Brennan in 2015 about these Syncland intercepts on Russians, about Trump and his teams having ties to the Russians, which turned out to be all garbage.
Don, there's so much misinformation or information not presented properly, like you're doing, hell of a job. I don't know if the public's going to believe anybody.
Well, that's why that's why we're doing today, Brian. We lay it out. They can go to the Substacks. Everything is sourced. They can pull up the reference material, read it for themselves. The dots are connected. That's the whole purpose of this whole thing, is to take all the minutia in the line, break it down to show that this was criminal. This wasn't a non-criminal matter. This wasn't dirty tricks. Okay, this was a major, I call it the crime of the century. Okay, probably one of the biggest sedition RICO cases. You talk about Atlanta putting a case together against Trump for RICO. You could put a RICO case on this one. This would be like shooting fish in a barrel with all the information out there.
Good point, John.
Putting this case, this would be like the highlight case. Trust me. Because, ladies and gentlemen, think about this. None of these people were ever properly interviewed, nor asked the right questions, nor any of the investigative stuff done to put the pieces together. Okay. In fact, you have just the complete opposite by the Durham findings. Okay. Let's go to the next slide.
You want me to go past this one, John?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I got to roll. So you have the conclusions. Here's the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen. Mueller report is the defining report. They spent 2 years. They found no evidence of Trump-Russian collusion, period. The Durham report reinforced what Mueller found, okay, that nobody in the intelligence community found any evidence of Trump-Russian collusion. So when you hear this crap today, that you hear from the left and you hear from some of these people like Brennan and Comey and Clapper, that the Russians are still involved and they pose that they wanted Trump, now you know you've been bamboozled on this, because there was never any evidence to justify doing that investigation and to put a president and his administration under that kind of microscope. It's amazing that Trump got anything done in the 4 years.
It's incredible. It's amazing. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's totally. So when you look at this, ladies and gentlemen, you have to start matching up the information and then start asking the question, who are the liars? When their testimony says one thing and their actions say another, you've got a problem there. And from my end as a criminal investigator, you got to get down and drill down and say, what is going on here? Is this an organized thing or is it not an organized thing? In a case like this was an organized thing from the top down. Then you find out there was a secret congressional review, okay, and this was in the Durham stuff, of the ICA conducted by the House Intelligence Committee. And they put together a lengthy report that was classified, and Adam Schiff and the Democrats locked it in the basement in January 2019. And I don't believe it's ever been released to the public, which is amazing. on this. Why? Because it'll tell you that there was never, ever any evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. Okay? Now, let's look at this Durham's investigation. Allegedly, the ICA was one of the keys of his investigation. He was going to look at that to make the determination as to the origin, to find out if there was any criminality involved in the ICA by the FBI and the CIA. Okay, they produced a big document of 1,200 hours. They reviewed the ICA. They interviewed analysts crafting it, including Brennan, the so-called fusion shell. They interviewed everything from top down, and why did they, to see if was there any criminality involved. And here's the sad part with the whole thing. Next slide. So you've got information that was reported from two anonymous intel sources who requested anonymity, okay? And they explained how this whole ICA came about. They said a number of the analysts objected, and they argued it was political innuendo and not sound intel. They said the ICA was written by 5 Brennan loyalists. They identified Kendall Taylor and Julius Garanis as 2 of them, with Kendall being the lead as one of the writers, Peter Strzok being with the other, or having the input into it. The Mueller report and all the other reporting has discredited the Steele dossier, the IG, that it was all rumor based of opposition research on Trump paid for by what? The Clinton administration. All the allegations were debunked, even by Steele's primary substort, okay, to the FBI, that he had made up the rumors from some of his Russian drinking buddies to earn money from Steele. Then you had information from the FBI, okay, which they incorporated into the ICA, where Comey said that the information was incorporated within the ICA because it was corroborative of the central thesis of the assessment. The ICA found it credible on its face, Comey said. Well, one can't be true and the other be true at the same time. Either it's a total false basis of the document or it's not. And in this case, all that information was not true. So now you can see the people in charge behind this thing, the leadership, are the ones putting together this false flag or this disinformation to make you, the public, believe that Trump colluded with the Russians. To do what? To make that Trump was an illegitimate president. Okay? And they succeeded in that. FBI source reporting, it was, Comey said, was consistent in all the stuff that he had seen. He said that Putin ordered the influence with the aim of defeating Hillary Clinton. That Putin feared Hillary Clinton. Well, I find that a little hard to believe, because this is the same Hillary Clinton, remember, back in the 2010 period, that got with the Russians, got with Google and all the major techs, and worked with the Russians in setting up their high-tech Silicon Valley platform in Russia, that mirrored an image what we set up in the Silicon Valley, that granted the Russians access to our high-tech companies on the East Coast and all over the U.S., which enabled the Russians to do what? I think I told you in one of the podcasts, to develop the hypersonic missile system based on information they had gleaned from some of our research facilities. So, fearing Hillary Clinton, I would say they're in bed with Hillary Clinton from that standpoint. So let's look at the allegations of deception. They detailed that it was some of the findings were it was hastily put together at the direction of Obama and his intelligence czar Clapper, did not follow any longstanding rules for crafting such an assessment. It was not farmed out to any of the key intelligence agencies for the input, and didn't include any annex for dissent, which was a normal thing in all prior intel assessments. It was a 2-page summary in the annex, summarizing the Steele dossier, and basically coming to the conclusion that Putin had personally ordered a campaign to stop Clinton's campaign to help Trump win. That was the key finding that the ICA put out. And then in August, Trump briefed Democratic senators. He also briefed John McCain about the allegations from the dossier on Capitol Hill. Now, this is the same Brennan, when he was interviewed by Durham, told Durham that the CIA had no information on any Trump-Russian collusion. But yet, in 2016, in August, he's briefing John McCain and other Democratic, Harry Reid, I believe both of them, the late Harry Reid and the late John McCain, on the Russia theory that Trump was supported by Putin. So when you look at this, you got to look at that. What do we have? We've got I call it association evidence. The two guys whistleblowers that came forward that asked for anonymity said former senior CIA analyst Taylor was a key member of the team that worked on the ICA. She was a Brennan protege. She donated hundreds of dollars to the Clinton to the 2016 Clinton presidential campaign. And in June, she gave $200, $250 to the Biden Victory Fund. She and Eric Samela, everybody remember him? He was the whistleblower that was identified behind the complaint, secondhand information on the first impeachment trial of Trump on the phone call there. And they worked together at CIA headquarters. The question I have, was Samela involved and had any input in the ICA? Again, the only way you can find this out is you'd have to do, again, while you do investigations. And these are the kind of association and investigative leads you would track down to verify one way or the other, so you could put your associations back. Then you had a source close in the House committee saying Brennan himself and FBI analysts work. They included former FBI counter chief Peter Strzok. Strzok was the intermediate between Brennan and Comey. And according to this source, he was one of the authors of the ICA. Next slide. The fabrication, the deception. Okay, they repeat that Taylor, Brennan didn't seek any expert advice from any of the so-called Russian house people at Langley, especially from the Center for Europe and Eurasia, before arriving at their conclusion that Putin peddled in the election. It was not according to most of the people on the dissenting side, they said it was not an intelligent assessment. It was not coordinated in the intelligence community or even with experts in the Russian house. It was just a small group of people selected and driven by Brennan himself, and Brennan did the editing. The official noted that the NSA analysts had also dissented from the conclusion, and they were one of the three from the 17 agency community invited to participate in the ICA, that they were the ones that dissented or didn't give a strong recommendation on what the FBI and the CIA concluded in the final analysis of the ICA. This was significant because the NC, upon Michael Rogers' departure, he's the one that testified that he didn't have he drew the conclusion about Putin and Trump. They didn't have the same level of sourcing and the same level of multiple sources that were cooperating to justify the findings of the ICA. The second senior official confirmed that career intelligence analysts complained that the ICA was tightly controlled and manipulated by Brennan, who worked for the Obama White House. And then they talk about it wasn't the 17 agencies. Remember, the media put out and gave the appearance that all 17 agencies agreed with the ICA findings, when for the public to understand it was only 3, and one of them, the NSA, did not completely agree with the conclusions arrived at the ICA. Taylor denied, she was interviewed by NBC. She denied any political bias. They talked about her boss, Julie Garanis. They were both detailed to the task force as from off the National Intelligence Desk on the Russia and Eurasia. So you can see how it comes together. Then here's a real interesting point. They work closely with a national NIC cybersecurity expert, Van Nunes, Vietnamese name, who had been consulting with the DNC cybersecurity contractor CrowdStrike to gather intel on the alleged Russian hacking of the DNC computer system. Well, I find that incredible because remember, CrowdStrike is the private firm that was hired by the DNC that refused to allow the FBI to get in and do search warrants to actually analyze the computers that they claim were broken into by the Russians. And CrowdStrike were the ones that in June had told the nation that it was more likely the Russians had exfiltrated information from it was part of the Cozy Bear and one of the other cyber Russian intel units. They had actually put out that it was the Russians in these two units, when in fact the owner of or one of the head guys in CrowdStrike testified before Congress, and they hid that for us for 2 years, that they were never able to prove that the Russians actually broke in and exfiltrated any information from the hacking of the DNC computers. So, ladies and gentlemen, this should show you the depth and scope of the deception involved here by the heads of these agencies. Again, it comes down to who's telling the truth. Next slide.
Yeah.
Next slide, Brian.
Oh, next one. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Okay, and January 11th, that's when within days of the dossier briefings by Comey and the Clapper and them to President-elect Trump, okay, and then the dossier was then leaked to, I believe, that media outlet that released it at that time, and then they released that version of the report, the ICA, and 2 weeks before Trump took office, and that's really what. Take the Steele dossier now and take the ICA. They are the two main documents used to manufacture the rouge to the public in the conspiracy case that Trump had colluded with the Russians. There it is in a nutshell, ladies. And those were the two major overt acts, okay, of how this comes together. Of how they got the public, where you had 55% of the public believing at one time that Trump was an agent for Russia and was an illegitimate president and a traitor. You had Clapper deny. We covered that on some of the line. We had the text. This is interesting. A lot of the information in the ICA was being leaked out, and you have a text in December. This is interesting, from Struck and Page, talking about a sister agency leaking to the mainstream media, basically meaning the CIA or the intel community, and discussing a Washington Post article, FBI in agreement with CIA that Russia aimed to help Trump win White House. Okay, and they make the quip that Struck argued that the CIA is more capable of manipulating the press than they were at the FBI, which I thought was quite interesting. Next slide. Questions the country deserves before the 2024 election. And I've covered a couple of these, but I'll cover them real quick here on these two slides so we can close this up. Again, if the Russians were the major threat, as they claim they were in the ICA, the media, the Mueller report, the Senate committee report, then why did President Obama shut down the Foreign Denial and Deception Committee in March of 2016 that had been operating for 40 years to counter Russian election interference? And then in August of 2016, why did he ignore the warnings from the IC community at the height of increased Russian cyber activity, and he issued a stand-down order for U.S. intelligence to do nothing to counter the Russian cyber attacks? Those, to me, are real key questions since they're so worried about national security of classified documents and secured presidential compounds, charging a former president with major crimes. I think the public needs to know these two answers to these two questions. Maybe we should be charging President Obama with two major crimes here on making us the Russian threat, making us vulnerable to national security. I don't know. These are questions.
Right?
Yeah, these are questions that the public needs to start asking and figure out for themselves, because from there. And then you have, why didn't Special Counsel Durham or the House Intelligence Committee interview President Obama? Why he didn't counter the Russian threat? And why Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, Charles Dolan associations with the Russian was not part of the ICA assessment. It shows you the dual policy. If you're a Democrat, no investigations. We ignore the law. If you're a Republican, no stone is left unturned. And that's what you see today, which is disgraceful. Why did President Obama allow these FBI investigations on Team Trump? After being briefed by Brennan, if they knew that the Russians had intercepted Hillary's plan, and they knew it was part of a DNC Hillary plan to taint Trump with Russian collusion, why did Brennan then instruct Comey on an electronic communication document to open up the 4 cases on the Team Trump members in late August, which Peter Strzok did? Why did CIA Director Brennan ignore establishing longstanding rules in putting together the ICA assessments? Why wasn't the ICA farmed out to the other key intel agencies in the government for their input? And why wasn't there an annex in the dissenting part of the ICA that would be normally done in all prior ICAs, which is a big departure from past practices? And then the last one, why hasn't the secret report been declassified and released to the public?
Is anybody pushing it?
I don't even think anybody's aware of it. I think the information that was presented, they're not even aware of it on from that standpoint. So that's from there. Then you have to look, and I want to conclude it by this, because this really says it all. Durham in his findings, and to answer the question, why did they only charge Sussman and DeVecchio with lying to the FBI? Why didn't they conduct a conspiracy investigation when Durham in his own findings listed and said it was not legally predicated, said there was a conspiracy? He said it implicated President Obama and I believe Vice President Biden, and yet he didn't follow through on following the logical investigative leads, okay, to do a conspiracy investigation. Why? Well, I found the answers after reading the 360 some page Durham report. It's in some of the areas there, and there's 2 key areas. Why they didn't indict any or look at all the FBI agents involved, okay, was because they didn't look at the FBI's agents on what they did as a crime. They looked at it more of that they violated. It was malfeasance, and they violated procedures and protocol. However, in their minds, this is what they stated, it was not criminal. Well, I find that total garbage.
So
because
by design,
By design, that's correct. If I was doing this case, ladies and gentlemen, I would be looking through the prism. I'd start at the origins start from the Brits back in 215 and walk it all the way through and start answering all the questions that you need to ask. Was there foreign and deal? Did they do an entrapment operation? Who said what, when, and where? Take all the communications, connect all the dots, take all the documents, put them together, and start sitting down and flipping witnesses, especially the FBI. I would interview every analyst and agent that was involved in Crossfire, Hurricane, or even associated with, on what did they do, what did they see, and why didn't they report any malfeasance or misconduct? Okay, those are the questions an investigator, if they were really investigating, would ask. And then the real key point is this, and this should get everybody gander up, okay? Because they came to the conclusion that the Alpha Bank, now we covered Alpha Bank, we told you how Jaffe, with a team of researchers he had hired, they were all in cahoots. They were working under a defense contractor. They created cyber tools to do what? To put into a thumb drive so Sussman could give to the FBI and the CIA. And then they kicked it out to the media where stories came out and said there was phone contact between Alpha Bank and Trump in these locations using Yoda phones. That was all manufactured. They did not look at that as a crime. They didn't look at that as an overt criminal act. They looked at it as basically that it's a political situation, and they downplayed it. That even though in a political thing, it didn't rise to the levels to be criminal. I find that totally crazy, because when you connect the dots, as we have done, we've now covered 3 criminal overt acts. We've covered Alpha Bank, the lying on the FISA warrant, the manufacturing of the ICA. I hope everybody on those 3 podcasts, they can see that what they did, okay, wasn't dirty tricks, ladies and gentlemen. It was a crime, period. To do what? To conspire to interfere in the 2016 election, to spy on a president-elect, to spy on an incoming president, to destroy a presidency. If that's not criminal, then I guess my almost 30 years as a criminal investigator was a waste of time. I guess I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Your dedication is in awe, okay, from a 34-year vet myself.
Well, I'm just pushing back on Durham and Barr because I hate to say it, they're bamboozling you what they put out. They use legal mumbo jumbo to give the appearance to the public that there was no criminality. And just like Comey did, remember, ladies and gentlemen, remember what Comey did for Hillary Clinton? He cleared her, and President Obama stated this 3 months prior. And what would Comey did to clear her? He used the same verbiage that Obama had used 3 months prior, that she had no intent to to have classified material on her computer, having no intent, and that the information really wasn't that classified.
Hey, John, while you're
take a step.
Well, you're on that, don't leave out the Mueller investigation.
Yeah. You can't make this. I mean, and then you had Mueller with 18 highly paid Democratic operatives, okay? And some of them today are involved in advising Smith and Alana on how to do their indictments on Trump right now. So you can't make this up. So when I say a conspiracy, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about association evidence, established pattern of a conspiracy. By themselves, these little details mean nothing, but when you put them together in a timeline, you connect the dots, you show the associations, you get to see the communications, you get a picture show, and that's how you prove the intent. When Durham said in his report that they didn't see any intent by the Hillary people to violate the law. Well, Hey, when you manufacture, hire a cyber expert to manufacture cyber tools. If that's not a criminal act, any U.S. attorneys or anybody on the left that's a defense attorney, please give me a call. I'd love to sit there and go on your show or podcast or whatever, and let's have a debate about how elements of a crime are met and what's real evidence and what's not. That's all.
John, what can all of us, this is awesome. I mean, I have learned so much, audience, so ladies and gents, and who's ever out there. But the bottom line is, John's giving you just a match. He's giving you the basics, and then somebody needs to pay attention, meaning all of us, our neighbors, our state, local, and community, everywhere across the nation, because next year, if you don't, we're done. We're finished.
Very true.
I'm not the only one in John that echoes that. We're done. All your major, whatever you listen to on your cable news networks, this country is over. Everything that these men and women have died for, from the revolution all the way through, it's all over. We're done.
Well, that's, Brian, why I end up always, and I end up at the end of each broadcast with the same thing. To ask yourself this: does the rule of law matter to you? And if it does, you have to ask as a citizen, okay, if it matters, how do we as a country move forward if we do not hold these people accountable for the crime of this century? That's it.
John, what's up next week? What do we got next week?
Next week, we're going to cover the next criminal overt act, which I think people will find very interesting, which will be the framing of General Flynn. We're going to cover how they did it, how they put it together, cover the evidence that came out, the documentary evidence. We're going to cover in depth the Obama meeting on the 5th. We're going to show the country that an outgoing president withheld critical information from an incoming, and basically Comey and them withheld information that Trump was under investigation. They lied to him saying he wasn't. If that's not a problem, as far as I'm concerned, I would say that's obstruction of an incoming president.
John, thank you very much. Audience, we ran over a little bit, but there's a ton of information here. And as I always say, with three things: peace. Well, I tell you what, I'm going to go to the third one, which is strength. Without strength, you're not going to have peace, okay? And of course, the love thing everybody does these days. Boys, keeping hard. It's really hard keeping all those together. And I would say, I should add this last week: sleep with one eye open. John, thank you very much. Unbelievable dedication, my friend. Unbelievable. Unbelievable amount of facts. My head hurts.
See you next week.
We'll see you then. Take care, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye. Good job, Brian.